So right now we're looking at our IDE, which was mentioned in the slideshow before. We talked about, just to review what we talked about in the slideshow before, we talked about what an IDE is, what primitive data types are, and the three main concepts of computer programming, which is sequencing, selection, and iteration. Sequencing being that your computer reads your code as a set of instructions from like 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Iteration being that your code can be repeated, and selection being that your code can take multiple paths. So what I'm going to do now is run through writing a couple basic programs so you can get a good idea of how to write programs in Java. There's a couple of things I'm going to go through beforehand. So first thing is right now we're using the program JGrass, which is an IDE. As mentioned before, an IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, which is basically an environment for you to write code in. To go through it real fast, there's a couple important things. So first, this box right here represents the text editor where you write your code. Right now it's empty because we don't have a program pulled up. Down here's the interactions menu. This is where you can test out code before you put it in your actual code. This is good to test concepts like figuring out what an output might be. As mentioned earlier, sometimes when you go through and you divide or multiply integers, mostly divide, you'll get results that you don't really see as being correct. That's because if we go through a test, let's divide 7 by 2. As you can see, the output is 3. And that is because anything that comes after anything that comes after a decimal point will be dropped, and it keeps anything that comes before. So when the answer is 3.5, it's just going to keep 3. So keeping in mind that integers don't round up, and that's a good thing to test out. Then you can also test out things like double multiplication. As you can see, it goes all the way to like 0.0001. It's kind of strange, but that is just because of how the computer multiplies. And it's really good to test around outputs to make sure it is correct. Now, so that's the interactions menu. Over here to the left is the file manager. This is where you can kind of see where your files are, and you can kind of go through your computer and make a folder and stuff that works good for you and a good program. And then we name it. For this one, let's name it test 1. So, as you can see how I'm writing my code, whenever you make a new class, a class should be capitalized. We're going to capitalize every other word, so this is going to be test 1. It's just industry standard. It really helps with how your code looks, and it helps later on when you make multi-class programs. So you want to denote it as public class, and then whatever you want the name to be. And then you put these squiggly brackets that tell basically anything that's inside of them that is code that is within that class. So then after we do that, now we're going to do Control S to save the program. As you can see, the same exact words that we put for public after public class are now within the file name. And that is basically because that is what denotes the file name. So you want to double check that it's that name .java, because it's a .java file. And everything looks correct, so we're going to save. And now after you did the initial save, now whenever you save after that, it won't bring up that menu. And I recommend saving regularly by clicking Control S, just because it's important. If your IDE crashes for whatever reason, you want to make sure that most of your code is saved, if you believe it. So, anyway, now we're gonna make something called a main method, which denote by putting public static void main, if I can spell main, string, square brackets, open and close, and then args, and then the same squiggly brackets. Basically, what this is telling, and let's press Control S first. What is this is telling your program, or your programming language, or your computer, I guess, to be more specific, is that within the section of code is going to be arguments that you run, which will then could be output to your command window down here, the interactions menu. So basically, the public static void main string args is saying this is the code that we're going to run. So now we're gonna type in something that prints out text in this menu down here. So we're gonna put system.out.print, and then we're gonna put hello world. So this is a method that is telling your computer for the system's outputs, print out the text hello world. As I mentioned earlier, a string is not a primitive type. So that means it doesn't work like other primitive types. Make sure you denote strings using these quotation marks right here. And then now we're gonna run the code. First, we're gonna compile it by doing Control B, continue. And that is to make sure everything's written correctly. If we get rid of this semicolon right here and compile it, we'll see that it throws an error. And it tells you test1.java.3. So for this Java file, on line 3, we're missing a semicolon. If you're wondering what the semicolon is, that basically tells your code where a line ends. And it's important to put that after every line, so your code knows where that section of code ends. Anyway, let's save by doing Control S, compile it again to make sure everything's correct. Okay, there you go. And now we're gonna run it. So how you run it is for JGraphs, it's Control R. Now, when you go to run code, every IDE is different, so just make sure you look up the right commands or combinations for your IDE. So let's do Control Run, and you'll see down here, there you go. Your computer is saying hello to you, and that is your first ever program. And this is a good principle of sequencing. As you can see, notice that this was a file. It read the code that these are arguments that need to be read, and then it printed out that statement. Now, say we want to run or print out hello world 5 times. We could type it 5 times, but the problem with doing that is it's time consuming. So let's do something called a loop. So how you denote a loop, there's 2 types of loops. There's while loops and for loops. While loops will keep running code until a condition is met. And then for loops will run the code in the exact amount of times you put it. So right now we're going to do a for loop. How you denote it is you put for and then a parentheses, int I equals 0. I is less than or equal to 5. Let's do less than 5, and then I plus plus, and then the squiggly brackets. What this is saying is integer I, it saves a variable as 0. This is how you make any variable. So int I, saying it's an integer named I, and its value it starts at is 0. You can set it to any value. 0 is a good starting point, but really any value works. Then we put in this condition, which is saying that I is less than 5. So that means it'll It will run this code until I is equal to or more than 5. And then I++ means that after it goes through all the code in here, I will go up once. So let's put in the same code from earlier. System.out.print hello world. Oh, there you go. Don't forget your semicolon at the end. And now let's save, compile. As you can see, no errors were thrown, and then run the code. And as you can see, I printed it 5 times. But you're probably wondering, why is it all together like this? Well, if you want it to space out words per line, you can also change the method to println, which basically will create a new line every single time you go to run it. So let's save and then run the code again, and look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Keep in mind that it will always start at that value. So it starts at 0, and the code ends right when it equals 5. That's important because if you make it less than or equal to 5, and you run it, oh, it prints 6 times. So just keep that in mind. You might be wondering, well, printing 5 times is really easy. You can just copy and paste your code. But this is really useful. Say if you want to print it 1,000 times. Let's do that real fast, just for the fun of it. As you can see, it did that really quickly, and it saves you way more time. And that is the concept of iteration. Now I'm going to show you one last thing before we end the video, and that is going to be the idea of selection. Now, as I mentioned earlier, selection is the idea that your code picks different paths. So right now, our code, when it goes through it, it sequences. So it goes through each line of code one by one, like a set of instructions. Then it iterates it. So it goes to 4, and then it notices, oh, this code should be ran this many times. And then it can select code as well. So let's get rid of this code right here and start. Oh, let's fix our squiggly brackets. I haven't mentioned it yet, but making sure your code is organized is important. I put my squiggly brackets under the first letter that starts that line of code. So for public, the closing bracket's under it, and the open bracket is at the end of it with a space. It just makes it look prettier, and it's easier to find where stuff is. So now we're going to go in here, and we're going to do selection. So let's say, let's make a variable and name it value. So this beginning part, as I mentioned earlier, denotes the type it is. It's a primitive type integer, and the name of it, which is value. And let's make it equal 100. Now let's type in a conditional statement. So what we use is the idea of if and else. Basically what it's going to ask is, if this condition is met, then run this code. If not, run this other code. So let's do if, let's say if value is greater than 50, then you want to repeat this code while value is greater than 0. And then system out println, and then value. So basically what it's saying is, for this condition, value is greater than 50. If this variable is greater than the integer value 50, then it will print the value. This is a while loop. It also has a conditional statement, and it'll repeat this code until this conditional statement is equal to false. As you can tell, though, we don't change the value of the variable value. So that makes it so if we ran the code, it would run infinitely, which is really bad. You don't want that to happen. So let's make sure we put in this code down here, value equals value minus 1. This makes it so it will go through this code and it'll subtract 1 from the value, making it so eventually it will be less than 0 or equal to 0, making it so that condition's not met. And then let's put an else statement. So this is if this condition's met, run this code. But what if it's not met? Well, let's run a separate section of code for if it's less than or equal to 50. We can either put the condition or we can just say else because it's anything that's not that code. So let's put else. And let's just make it so it prints system.out.print. And let's say less than or equal to 50. And there we go. Let's compile our code. Just to go through it one more time, we made a variable. We checked to see the value of that variable. If value is greater than 50, it'll return true in this conditional statement, and then it'll run this section of code right here. If that's not true, then it'll run the section of else. And you can always put code after this too. So say if you wanted to have a condition met, but not have an else statement, that's fine. This is more for you to have different options and different paths. You can also do an else if statement, which allows you to have multiple conditions. So what it'll do is it'll run through the first condition. If it's not met, then run through the second condition, and then keep going down until it finds a condition that's met. And an else statement is basically its own condition. It's if none of these conditions are met above me, then I'll run this code. And you don't need an else statement. If you don't have this here, the code will run just fine. This is more of to have options. So anyway, let's compile our code. And no errors are thrown. And then let's run it. And look, because the value was more than 50, now it counts down and it prints out that value. The reason why we use the while loop here is that we want it to loop through this data based off of that value. So while loop is good for when you don't know how much times you need to loop through something. Well, a for loop is good when you know the exact amount of times you want to loop through something. And now let's put in the value 50. As you can see, the condition right here is value is greater than 50. So that means the else statement checks to see if it's equal to or less than 50. So let's compile our code and run it and see, oh, less than or equal to 50. So that means it decided to take the else path. And that is the idea of selection. So this one program right now has all three main ideas of programming inside of it. It has sequencing, going through a set of instructions, selection, picks a path to go, then iteration with the while loop. And that is how you program. Now, I recommend if you wish to learn more about programming, I would start looking into the idea of methods and just finding whatever you can find online. It's good to look up the API of a language, which is basically the code that you can run. And when API is it basically tells you all the different types of stuff that you can run, the language of the language you're learning. So you're able to do more than just this stuff. If you want to put in your own inputs into your code, I would look up the scanner class and how to import classes. That's a good way to start. When it comes to learning how to program, Google is your best friend, and just putting in time and practicing it. I recommend you go and try making your own programs to see just what you can make with the knowledge you have now. And it's always good to look into more. Like I mentioned earlier, there's multiple different types of programming languages and IDEs. Java is a really good one for starting off because it's complicated but not too complicated. And JGraphs is a good IDE starting off because it helps teach you how to code because it doesn't hold your hand. I recommend, if you want to change your IDE, if you don't like JGraphs that much, look into the IDE Eclipse. And as well to that, if you wish to do more complicated things, or maybe you don't need to do super complicated things, you could also look into the programming languages C++ and Python. They're object-oriented programming languages, so they're extremely similar to how Java is. The only difference is basically the text they use to read code. But you can do all the same things in all of them. They're just better at very specific things. So really looking into different code and just practicing is important. The concepts carry over to every language, just the text might be different. So I recommend sticking with one language for a while and getting really, really good at that one language. If you have any more questions, you can always ask ChatGPT. And like I said, just practice and enjoy programming. It's you can do a lot with it. It's fun to learn how to get your computer to do whatever you want. And there's a lot of complexities to it later on. But really, what you learn today will be concepts that you'll use for the rest of your career in programming. So it's really good to always come back to this video if something confuses you and to really check what you could be missing. Thank you for watching and have a great day.